this. While you were experiencing when you first got involved with hip hop, whatever for whatever reason, or you heard your first song, whatever it may be.
Mhm.
At that time, did you feel that you you were part of something special, or did you realize it later that, like, looking back, like, man, I was part of something, or as you were going, did you were like, hey, this is where it's at.
Yeah. Well, I think to express that, you got to understand New Orleans. New Orleans, black culture, New Orleans, music culture. And I shared this before with Breezy. We talked. Is Congo Square is probably one of the most sacred black spaces in the country.
Mm,
Congo Square is in my neighborhood in New Orleans, Treme, which is the oldest black neighborhood. And to understand that story, you got to understand New Orleans. So slavery was slavery. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. It was an evil institution in no way, shape. But it was different in New Orleans in the way that Sundays, no one was supposed to work because of the black code, the code noir that dictated the lives of people of color in their area. So when the slave owners would go to the French Quarter to party, our enslaved ancestors, free people of color, the indigenous, and white people that wanted to come would gather in Congo Square, the area right outside the French Quarter. So let's say we were all family and we were separated on different plantations. We knew on Sundays we were coming back together. So it was a
mm.
time of celebration. That's why you hear the second lines on Sundays. The Indians during Indian season, which is usually holiday Thanksgiving time until Mardi Gras Day. Sundays we're doing our Indian practices that go back to the 1600s. This
Wow.
spirit of resistance, and so in that space in New Orleans was the only place in America where enslaved ancestors could openly drum without persecution, right? So when we look about that drum beat, we think about the Caribbean influence, we think about that West African, East African, whatever influence that happened in Congo Square during that time period. Brass instruments coming, that's where jazz comes. Then you hear this sound of whatever it is. One of the big sounds we hear out of New Orleans is bambula, that drum beat, right? And you hear that going up and down the Mississippi and spreading to different places as the diaspora and the movement continues, right? And I share that because when you look at how did I feel? I feel when I see on Mardi Gras Day or when I see the Indians and the drumming I do with our tribes, I see that as an extension. And so when I look at hip hop music, right, the beat is the beat that catches you first, right? And then you start hearing the lyrics, right? Um, I feel an extension of that, and that's why on when I was younger, I ain't gonna say the girl's name. Saturday night, I used to try to get to her house so I could watch Yo MTV Raps, right? Because it wasn't on anywhere else at that time, until I got into like high school, and then BET started existing, and but either way, but it was just that I had to be part of that, and that's why when I had the opportunity to start working in radio and doing that stuff, I felt that that was my connection, right? Not knowing the ministry call and all that stuff, it is what it is, but even still, um, you in my car, you're gonna hear gospel music, and then it might turn into Ice Cube, then it might turn into some of the Mardi Gras Indian songs, then it might turn into, the Hot Boys, then it might turn into D1, then it might turn into, whatever. You know what I'm saying? But at the end of the day, all that are part of the essence of who I am, right? And and I think that's what's important. Hip hop, it doesn't just define me, but it helped define part of me, and I think it's part of me, and it's a part of a lot of people, hence the resistance. When I don't have the words or don't have the energy, sometimes that song will speak it, you know, and I think that's the power of music in general, but especially hip hop. It's that voice that I didn't have at that time.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Thank you for that.
No problem, yo.
Now you mentioned Congo Square.
Right.
Paint a picture of an average Sunday night for those that aren't
So
there.
right now, I'm a board member for the Congo Square Preservation Society. We still every Sunday at 3 p.m. you can go to Congo Square, and the drum circle still exists that happened hundreds of years ago, right? People
Wow.
from all different cultures come to this sacred space. There's the ancestor tree, the tree of life. It has different names that have been there since during that time period, right? It's a place of where some of the original civil rights resistance started. In fact, the indigenous that would gather there, they saw the oppression because they were pushed off their land. right? By colonization. And they saw the oppression that the enslaved ancestors were going through. And so they made alliances. And so out of those alliances, they would take them in and protect them, make them part of the tribe, or they would show them how to navigate the bayous to get to freedom. And that's where the Mardi Gras Indian culture comes from, where we make these suits, that take a year to make. This is me in the one suit I made for myself, right? These are all individual beads. That's why it takes a year to make these things, right? Bead by bead. So the feathers and the headdresses are owed to the indigenous. The beadwork and the drumming, I don't have my drum in here, are African. So it's a combination of both cultures. So during the time of segregation, we couldn't go to the parades. Parades weren't for us, right? But the parades in the black neighborhoods were the Indians, another black masking crew called the baby dolls, and then the skeletons. And the Indians and the skeletons have vestiges in the Caribbean and Africa. So they're part of the diaspora, right? And so when we look at that Congo Square, painting that picture, it was a time of being free. It was a time of being joyful. It was a time of being fully our authentic selves that was oppressed or repressed during the rest of the week. And that was a time for us to even build a whole new culture, that gumbo that we talk about, where the West Africans, the East Africans, the Caribbean, the indigenous came together. They were their individual authentic selves, but when they came together, they created something new. Hence what we call the Creole culture of New Orleans, right? And that's why still to this day, there's a second line season that happens on Sundays, which originates out of Congo Square. Like I said, all these things that are there, the Indians and just other things, but it was also the place where you have the first documented civil rights movements. This is where people started talking about how do we address these ills that are going on, and this is not right, and what do we do to fight it, and so you could say some of the originations of the resistance that we see now in hip hop came and not originated, but started and continued through those experiences. So Congo Square is a very sacred space. And if you ever go to New Orleans, go there. If you want to learn more about it, they got tours and all kind of stuff with folks that understand it and respect it. But also, even there's a special place there that I want to shout out, a museum I volunteer at when I go home. It's called Backstreet Cultural Museum, which is right a couple of blocks away from Congo Square. But it talks about all these cultural things that I've been mentioning right now.